ways, I would say probably 80 to 90% of breastfeeding journeys could be saved by a 1 to 2 hour meeting on day 3 with just some skilled help with positioning and attachment. Because that's the core of it all. And by the time I see them on week 2 or 3, we can get back there. And we, you know, as you'll know yourself, we very often do, but it's a journey.
It is a very long one, very often. But also I wonder, so you have all those first midwife, then health visitor visits, and are they not trained on helping with attachment and positioning and stuff like that? Because they do come on day 3, right? Very often.
They do. I mean, non-pandemic times, they've come on day 3.
Yeah.
Day 5, day 3 come most often a phone call at the moment. Again, it's patchy. You know, there are midwives and health visitors who are wonderful and who are trained, and who, some of whom may be IBCLCs as well, and might be duly qualified, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's not everybody. And again, that patchiness of experience is what's so difficult, because if they've tried to help you, but that's not their core skills, one of the downsides of that help is actually mum feels like, well, somebody did support me and it didn't work, so it must be me. Whereas the interpretation is maybe needed slightly different support.
Yeah, I felt like that. I never blamed any of the medical professionals in the hospital, especially. They kind of knew we were sort of high risk of not establishing breastfeeding as easily as it could be, because I had an emergency cesarean and a bit of being upset, difficult emotions. So, you know, they say that then the milk can not come so easily. So they did help me with position. So like the rugby hold and stuff. I remember that was actually quite helpful, because it did work for us. But then again, he wasn't gaining enough weight. So they said, top it up. And that's where we actually ended up, as you say. So that was quite late when I decided to look for professional support, because Leon was already 2 weeks old. So he was literally just refusing the breast, because he was so used to the bottle. He was a tiny baby, so he couldn't really do it very well. He hasn't learned. He hadn't had a chance to learn. But yeah.
When things aren't working well and he's not necessarily attached and he's finding it difficult, even at 2 weeks old, babies can make a really rational choice, which is, I love feeding, I love my mummy, but I need food. And given that very base survivalist choice between a source of food and a source of comfort, I will go to the source of food preferentially, because I have to.
You have to, exactly.
And once we could teach him back to the breast, then it becomes that source of food and that source of comfort, and that's wonderful. But it's a journey, and it's about, you know, I kind of always go, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you have to come at it with that marathon mentality, which means, you know, by the time I meet somebody in your sort of situation where you're 2 weeks in and you're topping up and the supply's dropped and baby's not so keen on feeding, I'd love to wave my magic wand and make it all better by the time I walk out the door, but it's not going to be. But what I hope for is that every day looks ever so slightly better than yesterday. And if we keep along that path, that's when in a certain amount of time you look up and think, oh my goodness, I can't believe we got here.
Absolutely. That's what helped, actually, in my case. And it was a long journey. It took us 3 months, basically. I realized I wasn't thinking about it then, but at 12 weeks, Leon was feeding from both breasts quite successfully. And, you know, it was a satisfaction. Obviously, it was my choice. I could have given up, and it would probably have been absolutely fine, because he was just a difficult material to work with, to be honest. But yeah. And generally, my experience as your client was life-saving, because, again, that was what I wanted. And you offered help and solutions that suited us as a family. We wanted to do the hard work. But unfortunately, lots of women seek help on some more or less dodgy Facebook groups, and not only do they hear wrong information, but very often are being trolled or judged and made feel guilty. And my question here is, why is this always such a hot, emotionally charged topic, even when it comes to strangers' babies? Why do
we care so much how other people feed their babies?
Exactly.
I think it stems from wanting validation on the choices we made. So if we look at the UK, if I remember correctly, and I'm not very good with remembering the numbers, but it's about 86% of women initiate breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Which says to me that 86% of women, at the very least, are thinking to themselves, this is something I'd like to explore. I don't know where I'll end up, but it's something I want to give a try to. By the time we get to 12 months, 1% of British babies are being breastfed.
No way.
1%. And actually the drop-off happens much, much sooner. By 6 weeks, the majority of babies are at the very least being combination fed, the vast majority. So something's happening in that window. What I think is happening is mums are not getting the support they deserve. So they go through journeys where all the things happen that I described before. And the ones who find support are the lucky ones. And the ones who don't find support end up probably making quite a rational choice. They end up saying, I have to cut something from my day. I can't spend 2.5 hours out of every 3 hours on this feeding cycle in one way or another, because the baby and myself can't survive this.
No.
And so they end up stopping to breastfeed. And then there's a lot of emotion that comes with that. And what you want to believe at that point is that it was impossible for you. Because to believe other than it was impossible for you is to acknowledge that it could have gone a different way, that I could have ended up breastfeeding possibly with the right support. And people talk about mum guilt, and they shouldn't be guilty. They should be feeling almost angry at the system that didn't give them the support to allow them to do this. But then we internalize that decision and we see somebody else struggling with breastfeeding. And the only thing that comes to our minds is to sort of, we think is reassuring, to say to her, it's okay, I struggled and I stopped and then I felt much better. You can stop too, it's fine. Now, that is one legitimate voice. But for the mum who doesn't want to stop, she hears that very judgmentally. And the mum who doesn't want to stop is basically crying for help to breastfeed and being told that her choice is not that important, to being told that her decision to breastfeed her baby doesn't matter, and that lots of negative things about, selfish, you're doing this, it's for you, it's not for your baby. When actually what she's saying is, but I've made this choice on how I want to feed my baby, and I'm just asking for some support in how to do it.
Yeah.
Because yes, it's natural, but it's a learned skill. Okay. And we do forget that. We remember it with lots of other baby development things. So when your baby learns to walk, he will get up and he will take his first step. And then he'll fall over on his cute little bum. And you will phone everybody you've ever met to tell them that your baby walked and you're so proud of him. You will not mention to anybody that he fell over. And when he falls over for the 20th time in a row, you will acknowledge that this is part of the learning journey and that you know that he will get there in the end. What you would never do is look him in the eye and say, sweetheart, maybe walking's not for you, right? It feels so insane to have that thought. But that's what we do about breastfeeding. When a mum falls over a few times, instead of holding her hand and walking her down the path until she's confident, we look her in the eye and we say, maybe breastfeeding isn't for you.
Yeah. Oh my God. I feel like I'm going to play this fragment twice so people can actually hear it. And it's not any sort of, you mentioned guilt, right? But I know it's so many other emotions that people actually feel rather than guilt and should be feeling. Okay. Because genuinely something is not working, and it doesn't matter whether it is in the UK or Poland or everywhere else in the world, because maybe the numbers are slightly different, but I feel that the problem is there. And I remember when you once told me that all the people who say it should feel and be natural, they also grew up in different times when women had more babies. So, for example, we used to grow up watching other women feed. For example, I've seen one woman breastfeed in my whole life before I had my own baby.
100%. And then when you did see her breastfeed, likelihood was she was being as subtle as she could about it under a little cover, and you were being polite and you were sort of averting your eyes. But actually, if you'd grown up in a society where women were feeding openly, and as a little girl, you'd watched your mum feed her last babies, or your auntie feed her babies, or your friends, a lot of what I'm describing as learned behavior would feel instinctive because you'd have been learning it your whole life.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I remember with my first baby being all fingers and thumbs, knowing I had a breast and knowing I had a baby and not knowing how to connect the two. I had no frame of reference, but literally no frame of reference. And that's not how human beings are. We learn from modeling. We learn to talk because we talk to our babies and they talk back. And that's why they can speak in all the different languages that we speak to them, because they hear it, they absorb it, they learn it. But if you take an adult like myself who doesn't speak Polish and you were to conduct this interview in Polish, I might be a tad lost.
Just a bit.
Yeah, just a bit, because you can't know what you don't know. And you can only learn that from being modeled around you. And yes, theoretically, my profession shouldn't exist. It should just be womanly knowledge. It's passed down from generation to generation. We should live in societies where we're not in our little box on our own looking after our babies, but we don't.
It's not like that anymore. And yeah, we shouldn't be lying to ourselves. Yeah, exactly. I feel like there is also still this kind of internalized belief, but again, it's so like everybody's done it, so you can do it too. It's even like with giving birth. Every woman or every mother has been through it, so you can do it too. But again, there's so many things that can go wrong during childbirth, and you cannot anticipate problems. So same with breastfeeding.
But I think the really important bit with the breastfeeding is once you're over the difficulties, once you've learnt it, you're on the downward slope. And that's, I think, really important to emphasize. So any mums who are listening right now who are on the uphill climb, who are really finding this hard, when you get to the summit, God, the view's good. And honest to God, breastfeeding is for the laziest of lazy mums once you've figured it out. There is no admin. There is no washing up of bottles. There is no having to go back home because you stayed out longer than you intended and didn't bring enough food for them. You know, if travel were to ever come back again, traveling is so much easier with a baby. I think with my second, we went to visit the in-laws in Australia when he was 3 months old. And the thought of getting on those flights with bottles, he simply wouldn't have met that side of his family for a long, long time because we couldn't have done it. Whereas in actuality, easiest flight I've ever done with him. I sat there like Lady Mark feeding the baby, sending my husband up and down the aisles with the 4-year-old saying, well, I'd love to help, but I'm feeding the baby.
Sorry, I'm feeding the baby, exactly. Lovely excuse to just relax a little bit, isn't it?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, any breastfeeding mum who has not poked their baby when it's time to empty the dishwasher and gone, oh, sweetheart, love to help out, but I'm feeding, sorry.
Exactly. Love it. Absolutely love it. But yeah, you mentioned having your second child. So do you think that in general women relax a little bit when they have their second child and still struggling a bit possibly with the breastfeeding, but do they know more or?
You know an awful lot more. I think I will see, well, there's two types of, often one of the things I love working with is second time mums whose journey didn't go as it should have gone the first time around. And often they'll contact me still in pregnancy and we'll have meetings antenatally to really break down what happened, kind of unpack the first journey and put that package of support in second time around. A lovely lady I've been working with recently did something very similar. We scheduled that I would be at her house the day she got home from hospital, came back another couple of times. And it's just chalk and cheese, the experience. But the difference is that she has the confidence to know when something's right and something's